At the Request for Maxxon Priddy by Knial II. I came home to Mother's. The sun was going down. Mother had lived in the old house. It was stone, resembling a Richardsonian Romanesque castle. To say it was elaborate was to discount its intrinsic value. It was 2 stories, but the keep, or as Father called it, the tower, was 3 stories tall. I am not sure how many square feet it covered, but it was a significant number, I'm sure. Looking up at the black windows surrounded in those gray bricks made me wish to see her face. I waited for her to come to the window, see me, and smile. That moment obviously never came. I walked up the stone steps. There was a faint smell of dampness that was both stringent and tired. I placed my hand on the metal railing Mother had installed near the end of her life. It made me think of her beautiful blonde hair, tied up on top of her head. It made me think of those wildly elegant gowns she wore in the morning as she fixed oats for breakfast. I took a deep breath. Coming back here might be harder than I thought. For a number of years, I had made a name for myself working at a local radio station. I was gaining some traction, and I had to leave this place for the city. Mother had been so distraught, but she understood. I looked back at my Buick. That bright blue paint job it once had was fading, just like these times. I sighed and continued to step up onto the porch. Staring at the front door was like staring back into my mind. The cold steel of the doorknob felt so familiar in my hand. As a child, I can remember coming down for slumber to see the front door open and Mother listening to her records. She might see me, but she might not. If she wouldn't, then I would make my way to the basement door. That is a story I will wait to tell. I was the sole personal representative of Mother and Father's estate when they died. The house was mine. My friends call it the castle. They probably still do. The auction and burial came quick, but the castle, well, it took me a while to come around. I came here to visit her. I planned to visit her grave, out back. She was buried in the backyard, you see, but I didn't exactly get around to it. My plans had changed, and upon arrival, it was an arrival at my mother's request, written into her will. She asked that I come to the house after, and it felt wrong to do it for business, so I was here for sentimental reasons. So here I was, on the front step. The memories flooded me. This place had so many memories. I felt it was time for me to sell it and move on with my life. The property and house would go for a pretty penny. I didn't need the money, but Lord knows I could have used it. The door creaked when it opened. I let it slowly swing open. I just stood there for a while, feeling the cold air rush upon me. I watched the dust settle, then stepped in for the first time. I looked at the wilted flowers that sat in that dull-colored vase that Mother loved. I dared not touch anything, for it all looked so ancient. It was surprising to see the family chandelier was still hanging. It was now consumed by webs and dust. The house looked and felt dark. The staircase was wooden and ran up the side of the wall to the top floor where my room used to be. I thought about revisiting the old room. I also thought about revisiting Mother's bedroom. But that certainly was too much for me at the time. After all, she had only died a few months ago. The only room I wanted to visit was Father's. He was a strange man. He had been in the war, you see, and war changes a fellow. Mother had me when he was away. I never knew what he was like before, but people said it changed him. I had always thought war changed most people, but there was something a little different about my father. A war might give you some kind of disorder. You know, the sounds and lights, the people, it just brings you back to traumas. I mean, I would know this. I was also in the war. The second one, that is. The war wasn't pretty. I don't like to think about it, but I have seen soldiers suffer through those traumas, and it was different with Father. He had been stationed in Romania. He spent the war out there. He was there for almost a year, I think. I don't remember what the obituary said. The obituary was kind to my father. It called him a loving, supporting, and God-fearing husband and father. I had never seen Father hurt anyone, but to call him any of those things was far from the truth. He was a cold man. He was filled with coldness. His eyes stared at you in cold ways, and his skin was even cold to the touch. He was always nearly pale white. He received a large inheritance from my grandfather, and he was able to live out his time here in this castle. Mother loved the place, but I never saw her once show love for my father. I have seen other couples show affection, so I know that's how it works. Mother and Father slept in separate bedrooms, though. Father barely spoke any words to her. She would cook, he would eat. She would clean, he would sleep. He slept a lot. I mean, most of the time he slept. I remember asking Mother one day when I was about 12 years old, "Mama, why does Daddy sleep so much?" She smiled at me with those deep blue eyes and replied, "Daddy has to work at night, darling." That was a strange concept to me, working at night. But years later, I would come to understand my father worked the night shift at the morgues. He didn't need the money. Grandfather's inheritance was millions. He just did this out of his own goodwill, I think. But see, grandfather had been in the railroad business, and he left all this money to my father. Millions. And this castle. My father was a good man. Like I said, he never yelled or got upset at me, but he was just never really there. He wasn't dumb. He wasn't a bad father, but he wasn't a good one. He just wasn't there. And that's our relationship. That's how I knew him. I came at times to believe I had caused this problem. I was sure my birth and presence had killed his happiness, but Mother was convinced it was the war. I soon began to feel sorry for him, but that changed. As I got older, I heard strange stories about my father. I blocked them out because they were too peculiar to be true, but eventually the man came to scare me, and I believed some of these stories. I won't talk about them now. When Father was in the house, it just felt eerie. I didn't like it. I wished I had a different father at times, but you get what you got, and I had to deal with what I had. It would be strange to hear stories about Father as this lively young lad walking around the streets of Dover. I had heard he once was a ladies' man. Before the war, he was a good-looking man who could have had any girl he wanted. He laughed, joked, and drank with the best of them, but he chose my mother. Supposedly, their wedding photos were the only documented evidence my mother had of my father smiling. All of that stuff was supposedly in the basement. The place where I wasn't allowed to go. Mother told me it was where Father slept. Mother slept next to the living room and Father slept downstairs. It didn't seem weird to me. That is what I always knew. Earlier, I mentioned the basement. Well, one of those times I snuck downstairs. Past my mother, in the living room, I had actually seen into the basement. Mother was crocheting for me a new hat for the coming winter. I was in my year 6 of schooling. My curiosity was boiling over. I wanted so badly to see in the basement. I knew Father was out for the night. He was at work. I had not seen his Cadillac in the rocky driveway up front. I had to creep so delicately, step by step by step, down the stairs, careful not to step on the boards that would creak. It was much easier to make it across the old rug covering the Blackstones, as they made no sound. I looked out the front window. I knew it was nighttime, but all the windows in the house were so dark. That is, it was hard to see anything, including the sun. After a few grueling minutes of listening to my silent footsteps and wildly thunderous blood pumping through my head, I reached the wooden door. It was a strange moment in my life. I had never been so close to that dark green door with such an intention as to enter down into the basement. I will never forget that moment. I reached out, grabbed the black doorknob. It felt rusty and beaten under my hand. I gripped it. Cold. I twisted it. It unlocked. And I pulled the door open. It felt heavier than it looked. I peered into the blackness behind it. Cool air rushed past my face. I brought with it a stench of dead things. I almost coughed out loud, but was able to muffle my mouth with the pajama sleeve. I opened the door a little more and held my face to the darkness. Those stone steps appeared to fall down into the wild darkness as if they descended for eternity. For a while, the blackness stared back at me. Then I heard something I remembered so well. There was a scampering sound. Then there was a creak. Then I heard something say my name. Max, the voice whispered. This has been part 1 of For the Request of Max by Knial Piper. Find the link for the second part attached here too. Read quality, read Knial Piper.